talking about solutions that we're working on. So I'm Joelle, this is Rhea and Erika. We've been working on this project for about 3 years. I am a neonatal intensive care and healthy mom and baby nurse. I've been doing that for 15 years. I've also been working with the People's Harm Reduction Alliance in Washington and Oregon. I was the Director of Women's Services for 7 years, and for about 2 years I've been on the Board of Directors. Rhea is a parent of a beautiful, healthy 3-year-old named Lola, who was exposed to illicit substances during pregnancy. Rhea has also dedicated her life to harm reduction. She's worked in supportive housing, she's worked in syringe access, and she's currently going to school for public health. Erika is a parent. She has been working in advocacy for NICU families, and particularly NICU babies with special needs, for ever, a really long time. And she's also a tireless family advocate, and she does that professionally and non-professionally. And by the way, an interesting thing about both of my colleagues, I'm like the boring one that was a coward and just went to school to try to do good things. These two both, in their background, became supervisors of archaeological digs just because they were like, yeah, I didn't go to school, but I'm gonna tell you how to do this anyway. So I'm so impressed with both of them. Anyway, little tidbit. Okay. I know the ladies from Harriet's Apothecary did a much better job of this than I can, but in our small way, in all of our presentations, we like to acknowledge the indigenous land that this baby is taking place on. So we invite you all to join with us and pay respect to elders past, present, and emerging of the Chicamaca, Hauma, and the Choctaw Native American nations. So who are we? We have been working for 3 years on this project, like I said, and we've had people come and go and come back and whatnot. Primarily, we are people who use drugs, and we are parents. We're also nurses, doctors, mental health and substance use counselors, doulas, public health wonks, social workers, lawyers, advocates. We have pulled from all kinds of different areas. What we really want to do is integrate the work that has been done already. So we originally were organized under the National Perinatal Association, and one of the goals of NPA is to integrate, advocate, and educate. So we've pulled from researchers like Lenora Marcellus, Ron Abrams, Loretta Finnegan. We've pulled from HRC. We have sought out trans men who have delivered babies. We have sought out people of color groups. We're trying to bring all of this stuff together because pregnancy doesn't happen in a vacuum. People have lives, and they have backgrounds, and they have other needs besides just their pregnancies. So very recently, about 2 weeks ago, we took the project away from NPA supervision, National Perinatal Association, and that was just an issue of NPA was really down with harm reduction until it was time to do harm reduction. So once we presented our materials, which describe in detail how to use drugs more safely and what people who use drugs can do, they were like, we don't want to move forward with that. And to us, that was unacceptable. So we're doing this independently now. It's only been a couple weeks, like I said, so we're currently exploring options for other organizations for sponsorship, partnership, and funding eventually. Hopefully that would be great. Anything to add, guys?
So why does all this matter? So there's no comprehensive standardized guideline that exists currently in the United States that helps, a toolkit that provides consumers with the ability to navigate their own pregnancies and have education about the pharmacology of drug use, harm reduction, any of that. So women make up 40% of people with substance use disorders in their lifetime. 5.9% of pregnant women use illicit drugs. I'm just reading the slide, so. 8.5% drink alcohol and 15.9% smoke cigarettes, which is a pretty high amount And only 20% of treatment centers offer programs for pregnant people, and only 3% allow them to keep their children with them, which is my experience. When I had to go through treatment, I wasn't able to keep my kid with me. Children are commonly removed from their families for substance use in the absence of evidence or abuse or neglect, despite recommendations of the contrary, and there's no link between substance use and child abuse or neglect, which corners back to what our previous presenter was saying, is that social determinants are more of a factor about outcomes than what people put into their bodies when they're pregnant.
And I would just like to add to that, the numbers of pregnant people who use alcohol or smoke tobacco are much higher than the numbers of people who use illicit drugs. And easily, by far, tobacco and alcohol are the most harmful substance exposures in pregnancy. I also wanted to point out just there are such high barriers. People are so judgy, they're like, oh, well, you should just stop, you should just get into treatment. How are you gonna get into treatment if you have 3 toddlers at home and you can't bring your kids with you and you're a single mom? The barriers that we place on these people are unsurmountable. And like Rhea said, there is no causal link between substance exposure and child abuse or neglect. The causes of these problems that we associate with substance use are not about substance use, they are about poverty, experience of racism, trauma, and violence.
And to build upon that too, you know, as you're talking about the women that you work with and how you describe that population, one of the things we know about people who are pregnant and use substances, the vast majority, more than half of people, quit using substances altogether in their pregnancy with absolutely no assistance or support. Often without disclosing their use, without describing their use. It is something that people make positive choices during their pregnancy. It's an exceptional time and people make decisions that are right for them at that time. What we don't focus on is then that there is a much, much smaller percentage, the percentage that we then think represents the whole substance using population, who are in a state where they need interventions, where they could benefit from interventions in healthcare or other services in order to manage what might be chaotic substance use or use that they are not able to reach their goals while they're using. So again, we need to emphasize that when we talk about pregnancy and substance use, the picture that is often painted is of those who are in greatest distress and at greatest need. And when we look at what the actual harms are, or the actual use, or the actual consequences of substance use in pregnancy, most of the time, it's not an issue. It is not the factor that most affects the outcome of the pregnancy.
So this is pretty funny because you showed this slide before. So what people are being told is like the narratives that they're these tiny victims and they're born addicted and their baby's hooked on heroin. And the reason that it matters, I think now more than ever, having this conversation and recognizing that there needs to be an empowered population of people who are educated is, the truth is, like, there's a lot of babies being born with now, or neonatal abstinence withdrawal syndrome. And so like every 25 minutes, babies being born suffering from opioid withdrawal. You showed that slide before, so I'm just gonna keep it moving.
So on this slide, I want to mention 2 things. Firstly, language. Babies are not born addicted. Addiction is not a medical term. And even, like 50 years ago when it was a medical term, it refers to a set of behaviors such as spending a lot of time acquiring, using, and recovering from drug use or neglected responsibilities. And y'all, babies don't have responsibilities. So that is something babies cannot do. I meant to mention earlier, we're also really intentional about what kind of language we use in these documents, because the kind of language that we use not only shapes our own thoughts, but it signals to our clients and our patients whether or not we respect them. So we very intentionally use the term pregnant people instead of pregnant women. We try to talk about parents, and we try to really acknowledge that not all families are heterosexual, not all families have 1 or 2 parents, and we do our best on that. We're of course working on it, and we're probably going to mess it up in this presentation. But we're working on it, and we're all trying to do better on that stuff. The other thing I wanted to mention on this is research about people who use drugs while they are pregnant is of very poor quality. We have some good-ish studies, but one of the major problems with research about any kind of people who use drugs, and particularly pregnant people who use drugs, is that we only have data on the people that get caught. So that means we have data on people who are already involved in the criminal justice or child welfare system, which means that they are more likely to be poor, young, unmarried, or brown or black. And so we are not getting the whole picture of everybody who's using drugs in pregnancy, and that's really important to keep in mind.
So I'll tell you about the good times. So the National Perinatal Association is an organization that's still involved with fact I'm still on staff there, even though the difficulties that we continue to have. One of the things I love about NPA is it's an interdisciplinary organization. So first I'll define the perinatal period. So when we're talking about the perinatal period, we're talking about preconception and reproductive justice and health, and when do you want to get pregnant, do you want to get pregnant, how do you want to get pregnant. We're also talking then about the gestational period. What is your pregnancy actually like? And then we're talking about the first year of life postpartum. At that point then you are in the unique position of having two patients, both the infant and the parent, and you're attending to both of their health care needs. So the perinatal period encompasses and demands caregivers that cover all sorts of realms. So we're talking perinatology, neonatology, social services, obstetrics and gynecology, midwives, doulas, social workers, everybody working together in order to deliver the services that we are still fortunate. Pregnancy is considered a unique time in a person's life where we have prioritized delivering healthcare services. And even though it's poor, even though it takes time, even though it may mean you're late to care, we still prioritize that pregnant people and their infants get access to care. And the person who delivers has access to care for 6 weeks after they deliver their baby. So the National Perinatal Association has been a wonderful organization. It has always tried to elevate the voice of parents. It's always tried to elevate the voices of people who are most affected. We did some amazing work under their umbrella where we are able to talk to both parents and providers and people who talk about perinatal substance use about the harm reduction model. They all love the harm reduction model in theory. Where we ran into issues was when we started talking about the idea that abstinence during pregnancy was not sufficient if we're delivering quality health care. People are allowed to set their own healthcare goals, and if their goals include continuing to use substances, there's absolutely no reason they can't use them safely. There's absolutely no reason they shouldn't be able to partner with their medical providers and to get the information that they need to make the best choices possible for them. And it sucks when people that you have come to trust and care about and work with who say they believe in it ultimately can't do it out of fear. And there's I think it's fear. They're embarrassed about what they're doing, but they're still doing it. So that has brought us to where we are now, which is that all those materials that we created and presented to them about safer substance use during pregnancy, about all the things that matter about pregnancy, we want all these materials to be about pregnancy plus substance use. Not looking at substance use as the defining issue in your pregnancy, because frankly it's not. It's not medically the defining issue, and when it comes to long-term developmental outcomes, it is not the determinant factor there. So it is more important that you're in control of other things like you're visiting your provider and eating well and having access to all those things that keep you healthy and benefit you as a person that are going to improve the outcomes in your pregnancy. We try to remind people over and over again that substance use is one small aspect of it, and whether or not you disclose it and when you disclose it and how you want to talk about it is up to you. Some of us don't have that luxury. I hope more and more, many of us do have that luxury to decide when and how we disclose our substance use.
In all of our materials, there's 8 booklets total, and one of them is for everybody. It's about pregnancy, normal prenatal care, what are your rights as a person who is pregnant and uses drugs. We have one about injecting and methods of substance use, and then we have 6 about the various classes of substances that are more commonly used without a prescription, shall we say. So we've got opioids, stimulants, which includes caffeine, I'll be talking about that tomorrow, come see me. Benzodiazepines, tobacco, alcohol, and cannabis. So we have different booklets for each person. So our idea is hopefully service providers will be like, okay, well here's the basic one, and also you smoke meth and weed, so here's these other 2. And so we want to be able to have a comprehensive tool that provides real evidence to people, because a lot of researchers will be like, oh, we just don't know. No, we know. We have been studying this issue for over 40 years, and we have yet to find any strong evidence of any severe negative outcomes on infants. So when people, except for alcohol, thank you, and nicotine, of the illicit substances. So when people say, oh, we just don't know, so it's safer to not. Of course it's safer to not, but people are. And so we need to provide them with accurate medical and scientific information. Also in this project, we're kind of presenting the family stuff here because it seemed like the right audience. However, we also wrote several academic papers. I wrote the one about pharmacology and effects of substances on pregnancy, and I believe as of now it has 170 academic citations. It is extremely thorough. Just let me know if you're interested in that as well. And that's what these booklets are based on. Here's kind of what they're going to look like. Are they all gone, you guys?
Let me tell you this, we're going to show later in the presentation, our ethos on all of this is open access, this is free, we want this to live and grow and expand and be adapted for people's communities. So we're going to show you later on, we have, I don't know if you're on Facebook, if you're not, we can still find ways to do it. But at this point, we put all the files available on this group. Anybody who contacts us or emails, we'll give you our email information. Absolutely, you can get it, you can download it, you can print it, you can adapt it, whatever works for you. So,
because the whole point is for people to have access and to be empowered for their entire pregnancies and their own healthcare situations. So.
And we envision people bringing this to their healthcare providers, because change doesn't come from the top down. People don't give up power. You have to demand it and take it from them, and that is what we want to empower people to do.
So if we got your paper, we would have all the information that are in all these books?
absolutely, we're constantly working on it. Again, we struggled with what to even give everybody today because everything's a work in progress. But yes, absolutely.
And
everything's available.
The first quote that FedEx gave me for the stuff I wanted to print was $3,300.
I was like, no!
So I was like, well, can't do that today. But that's why we're looking for funders. Anyway, so. What do we want? We want all of you to join us and work for free, tirelessly, and devote all of your expertise to us. Especially if you're a person who has used or currently uses drugs during pregnancy and parenting. We're looking for organizational partners. We're really looking for funding. And if we get funding, the first people that are getting paid are pregnant and parenting people who currently use drugs. We would love to be paid eventually, but we're not the priority. That is our goal. Also, as a part of this project, we have been trying for a while. We've written a few grants. We haven't been able to get anybody to fund this. We want a speakers bureau with a training process that is created by and for people who use drugs to share their expertise and their stories if they want to. We also intend for this training to give people an opportunity to maybe reframe the blame. And because I I've been to a lot of medical and nursing conferences, and they get some poor drug user up on the stage who's just like, oh, I was horrible, I'm a terrible person, I hurt my baby. And
Thank you for putting me in jail so that I could get clean.
Yeah, I mean, if that is your story, then that is your story, and I respect you. But I want to invite people who use drugs to think about that again, and to think about the systems that caused those conditions. And we envision having a speakers bureau where conferences from all around the country and the world will contact us and will be like, I've got a person for you. And we will pay them wages, childcare, travel, meals, conference registration. That's one of our more lofty goals. So this is our Facebook group, and feel free to contact any one of us if you haven't experienced downloading documents from a Facebook group before. We had a website up until a couple weeks ago, so this is what we have right now. We're probably going to get another website eventually, but we're just in a state of flux right now, so please bear with us. So it's Advocates for Perinatal Care and Harm Reduction on Facebook. Everybody's got that? Last slide is just our contact information. Get out your cameras again, please. Please contact us.
Are you going to explain
We
what
want
that
to
is?
share this. I was working on this stuff one night and ignoring my partner, like I do a lot. And I was just talking with these two, and we were texting back and forth, and Marcelino was like, you guys are like the Cerberus of harm reduction. And I was like, drop what I'm doing, I need to make that picture happen. So this is us as Cerberus, because I also didn't have another picture of the three of us together.
And we have to say too, I mean, obviously we're not doing this alone, and this has been so informed, you know, when we looked at, you know, how do we talk to patients and pregnant people about their rights going and talk to their providers. Sure as hell, we looked at Harm Reduction Coalition stuff about patient rights. You know, when we've looked at, I mean, so many other organizations, and Intervales has informed this work, but again, this is work that all of us own, and that we hope that we're able to take forward and make useful, and to help our families, you know, prosper and thrive and do well. You know, one of the ways that I came to this whole work in the first place, I've been a parent advocate and a NICU advocate, and, you know, for years and years and years. And I watched a panel 5 years ago where Joelle sat on it talking about the rights of pregnant people around substance use, and they were talking about the needs of these people, and every single thing that they wanted, everything that they asked for was the same thing that every other family needs and asks for. But I can think about how when I was in the neonatal intensive parenting unit with my child dying from complications of their prematurity, everybody came to me and said, this is not your fault. These things happen, we don't know why they happen. I am so sorry that your baby is dying. And I watched a panel of parents sit in front of a room like this and say, everybody came to me and told me, this is my fault. You did this, and this is the consequences of your action. And it's not true. And we need to stop telling that to people, because everybody deserves the same kind of action. It should never be coercive, for one. I think we all agree on that. But we start from the premise, I'll let them expand upon it, but the premise is you get to decide when you want to be a parent, how you want to be a parent, and with whom you want to be a parent. If you decide to give birth to a child, you should have a say too in who nurtures and parents that child.
Yeah, I just want to add to that it shouldn't be any different. We should all have the ability to decide when and if we're ready to have children, and whether or not we're using drugs or we're not using drugs. That shouldn't make a difference. And also, I would like to also add that dudes don't have to deal with any of this stuff, which makes me mad.
I also want to point out, yes, totally. Long-acting reversible contraception and sterilization procedures should be available to everyone on demand for free. Targeting people who use drugs sends a message to those people that you are not worthy of reproduction. We don't want more of you, and that is unacceptable. And the day that it makes me so I almost swore. It makes me so mad, you guys, because healthcare providers that I work with think that we, as nurses and doctors, should have control over the reproduction of our patients, and that is bonkers.
Yeah, actually, that was what I was going to say. It's weird. I was just going to say, I think that one of the issues that I think about when I think about Mark and I think about people who are really interested in figuring out how to provide that in a way that's respectful and accessible is the issue. I think it's often the issue is on the clinical care side. So it's education for the providers who don't know. Actually, they either don't know or they are willfully ignorant to the history of eugenics and coercive reproduction. And so I think that's just one of the things that I've worked on is to make sure that the docs and MPs and nurses and other folks that I get to come in contact with at UCSF know that history, so when they're thinking about doing reproductive health counseling to anybody, but particularly to folks who've been targeted for some of that coercive and eugenic practices historically and yesterday, that they're aware of that, and so that they can really decenter the conversation in that way, and even speak to that conversation, because most of the women that I work with have had multiple experiences already, so it's not their first pregnancy, when they were working with me, and so they've already been through the healthcare system like Lexi had and had terribly negative experiences of discrimination and disrespect and violence, and so the providers need to know that, and they need to see that in a different way.
But the comment I'd like to make, in addition to what you were talking about, is that some women do use abortion as contraception, and that should not be stigmatized. For some women, that is the only thing that works for them, given their life and given their situation and given.
I just want to share. My daughter was delivered at 25 and 3. She was in the NICU for 106 days, had 3 blood transfusions, a heart operation, was intubated for a really long time. Shortly thereafter, I got pregnant again. And I realized, because I had an incompetent cervix, whoever the fuck made that term. Sorry, I just dropped an F-bomb. But I realized that I could not, in my own heart, go through a pregnancy where I could potentially deliver preterm at that same time again. And so I chose to abort that pregnancy. And I felt really bad about that, but that was my choice. And so I'm just hearkening about what you're.
And one of the things that gives me hope is that there is information out there for people who have the skills to access it and the resources to access it on how to perform their own abortions using medication. And we would really appreciate help from anybody who is in reproductive health or women or pregnancy or obstetric care to help us in order to make that information more available to people about how they can do that if that's their choice. All of the things that we write about don't start from the assumption that this is a wanted pregnancy. It starts from the assumption that you have the capacity to get pregnant and you get to decide how and when.
Ditto and ditto, and I just want to explicitly state, a lot of people who are pro-choice are like, of course we don't like abortions. No, I love abortions, and I have never needed one, but I have personally paid for one, and assisted my friends and family members through them on multiple occasions, so I am pro-abortion.
I just want to say one last thing. Really, at the end of the day for me, the thing that I have struggled with my entire life, being a drug user, being a woman, being a person who has experienced multiple traumas, is having to deal with stigma. And this movement and harm reduction has given me the ability to have a voice and empower myself to feel like I'm a valued fucking person. And I don't feel ashamed. I feel powerful because I am empowered with knowledge and evidence. And I hope that together all of us can move forward and help other women and pregnant people have the ability to do the same thing.
Absolutely, and I'm going to go back to how that happens in the first place. So we talked, about how people are identified as substance users, how you actually enter into the CPS system. It's very low barrier to be entered into the Child Protection Welfare Center. So some of our friends from New York and our coalition are going to talk tomorrow about the ethics and everything about identifying and testing pregnant people for substance use. So we're very excited about that. Go to that one. So.
Can you say when it is? So people
Oh, it's at 11 a.m. It's a round table. Please come.
Yeah, and so that's the important thing. Now, yes, we have been, I only alluded to it very briefly, but there's a whole component of this project that's about navigating the legal and child welfare services. We put those together because they are intimately associated with one another. And we have several attorneys. One of the resources we will always refer people to is National Advocates for Pregnant Women, because they have done some amazing work. The case law and everything is established about substance use in pregnancy, about testing, about informed consent, things like that. We know also Elephant Circle out of Colorado also does a great deal of fantastic legal advocacy around this, especially because they're in Colorado. They've helped establish a lot of case law around cannabis use. But when it comes to child welfare services, again, it is guilty until proven innocent. If that's even the case, you're not entitled to legal representation or representation of any type. So more often than not, navigating that means complying to get your children back until you can then maybe start to address the injustice of what happened. But when it comes to actual charges or criminal prosecution and things like that, we have some attorneys who work for us who are very good at explaining that it has not been established that substance use causes harm to children, and the burden of proof is upon the prosecutor to do that. And we're also developing a list of expert witnesses who are willing to testify about that. But hopefully all those things with these resources that we all hope to gather together will cut that off before it even gets to the point of charges being brought. But it's not just CPS either, it's also custodial hearings. It's also parent against parent and family member against family member, that we need to defend the rights of people who give birth.
That's why I feel like this project is so important though, because if in my own circumstances, I was able and educated enough to know what my rights were, and I could navigate that system, and I have privilege in that way that a lot of people don't. And so this project is very important to me, because if we can educate other pregnant parenting families about how to navigate the system, the outcomes will probably be much better. I'm nervous, sorry.
And one last thing, we also have a brilliant lawyer who's also a master's in public health who created a presentation about perinatal substance exposure, and the intended audience of that presentation is lawyers and judges, so we can share that.
That's Bernadette Hoppy. She works with the University of Oklahoma, New York. She's fantastic and tireless advocate and has been for years. It's incredibly difficult to establish trust in the first place. We have not necessarily, what we have done is we have invited people, we've left it open, and we have parents who have come to us and joined us. We all identify as substance users, and so we try to get rid of that barrier in the first place, but we also don't want to ever be coercive and asking somebody to use their story. Would it be fantastic to get the point? You have some wonderful things like with She-Way and Her Square and some other programs up in Canada that we'd like to see emulated and reproduced. But no, I think at this point, what we're doing at this point is letting that network of parents and families and advocates grow naturally by word of mouth, so that people know it's a trusted place. And it is growing, but then the question is, how do we organize and act up? while still protecting ourselves, because parents are vulnerable.
And another part of that is that we really need funding, because we would be giant assholes to be like, oh hey, you're a chaotic substance user and you've got a toddler at home. You have tons of time to devote to this project and not get paid, right? So that is not what our goal is. So we're hoping that now that we have some products, which you have samples of, that we'll be able to work more on getting funding, because we, like Erika said, we don't want to coerce people, and we don't want to be up here trying to use your story for our project. We want to be able to partner with people and compensate them fairly.
I just wanted to, the Homeless Prenatal Project in San Francisco was one program that was doing some really interesting peer-to-peer work, particularly when women were coming into the OB late in crisis situations. And so they had a pretty good system where the high-risk, so-called high-risk OB at the public hospital would then call them, and then a peer would come to do accompaniment and advocacy. That didn't, I mean, you're moving.
For all those who are relaxed.
You speak to it, yeah.
She's the one who does that.
Right.
Not the peer advocate.
Okay, great. Can you talk a little bit about?
No, we're not. We're responding to our own trauma.
Yeah.
We just lost one of our moms last week, so.
Oh, that was it. That was all. I just wanted to say, I mentioned that. That was something that some of the women that I had been involved with.
Yeah, there's
Shove it in the nose like you do with anyone else.
it's funny because we actually addressed this very topic, and there isn't a whole lot of research available about it. But what we decided was that it's better to Narcan somebody than not. So
Alive is better than dead.
yeah, living is better than dead.
And the truth is, if we start to try to calculate what is the fetus's impact versus what is the parents, it's kind of a false dilemma to put ourselves in. We need the gestator alive if we're going to protect the fetus.
And I asked Phil Common about this. He's a researcher out of UC Berkeley. I think he's one of the leading, monkey mucks on overdose in the country. And really, there's very little research about pregnancy and overdose, because it's one of those things that would just be really hard to research. Like, please sign up for my study. I'm going to intentionally put you into overdose, which might kill you or your baby, and then we're going to study what happens. Like, we can't do that study. So it's really, really hard to get information about this.
But you could do it if it's happening, though.
Right.
Too. So I mean, not maybe as an epi study.
It's also very problematic. I would say, in my experience, pregnant people don't want to do anything that could put the baby at risk, the wanted pregnancy at risk. And I think we have to be mindful of that. It's a little bit dangerous, because in our culture, we still do expect the mother to give up their life.
Doctor, I work with pregnant women who live on the street who overdose all the time. I'm letting you know medically you need to use Narcan. The ethical thing to do is to use Narcan. The best medical thing to do is to use Narcan. You cannot make it.
There's specific. We're not
You
saying we
use
don't
Narcan
want
as you would for anyone else.
Same
Use the
amount.
same dose.
Exactly the
You
same.
cannot calculate that. So if I have a person who is psychotic, let's just say she's pregnant, and I think that she cannot be on the street, and I want to conserve her because of the safety of the child, you can't do that. It's against the law, and actually leads to different outcomes. I'm saying the same thing. If you have someone who is dying in front of you, your thing is about the person who is there in front of you. That is the ethical and moral thing to do, and medically the correct thing to do.
Right.
So just, you can give them my medical license number and Narcan everyone you want on my medical license.
And the truth is, legally, the baby is not an entity until it's been given birth.
It's the person, not the fetus.
Does that make sense? Like, is that something?
The short answer is no, we don't have anything other than what you have. So just treat it like you would treat any
an
person.
opportunity to speak to, because you got kind of cut off.
Hi, I work for a program called the Holistic Prenatal Program. And when you were mentioning the outreach and going to the doctor, that was
You know, the other stuff we can work through, whatever they want, but it's the prenatal care. And that we already, with the homeless prenatal, the idea is to capture the motivation that you know, a woman has when she's pregnant. You know, I hear many different stories. I stopped using meth when I was pregnant, and then you know, screwed back up later on. Or, you know, so it's about the mother not just naturally is not wanting to harm their child, and we try to use that motivation in a way of harm reduction too. It's just using that motivation to support them in a very non-judgmental way. You know, I'll just go, hey, it's okay. Let's just figure out what we're doing for today, or what can we do to get you to a prenatal.
I'm really curious, and something we brought up too and we think about a lot is people who've already been traumatized with the medical system. So a lot of the parents that you're working with, is it their second, third, fourth, fifth? I mean, do you feel that it could be a restorative process? Yeah.
Yes, most are third, fourth, lots of children. I do think it's an excellent opportunity for some restorative work with the medical community. And you can't really obviously get better care in that right there. To just restore some hope in what we do. And I feel like it's an opportunity, and we can't waste those opportunities to create justice in the medical system for the women that we work with. And that is our fucking responsibility. Ours, not theirs, ours. So.
No,